They were seconds away from erasing his name from the empire he built with his own hands, the ink hovering above. The paper was not just ink, it was the final breath of a kingdom. The billionaire, who once commanded boardrooms and markets, now sat alone at a long cold table at 8 in the morning, ready to sign what he believed were his bankruptcy papers. The sun had barely risen, yet his world was already setting outside the glass walls of the office. The city moved as usual, unaware that inside this silent room a titan was about to fall. His name was Adrian Cole, a man who had started with nothing but a borrowed laptop and relentless ambition. He had turned sleepless nights into global contracts, transformed rejection into resilience, and built a corporation that employed thousands. But today, none of that power seemed real. His lawyers stood at a distance, their faces carefully neutral. His financial advisor kept glancing at the clock as if time itself wanted this moment to end. Adrian felt every second pressing against his chest like a weight he could not lift. He replayed the past year in his mind. The sudden market crash, the betrayal of a trusted partner, the aggressive takeover attempt that drained his reserves. He had fought like a warrior, cornered from every side. Yet here he was, defeated by numbers on paper. The documents in front of him spelled collapse, liquidation, surrender. He inhaled slowly, telling himself that signing would at least bring certainty, that the chaos would finally have a conclusion. His hand reached for the pen, his fingers steady but cold. He had signed billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking, yet this signature felt heavier than all of them combined. Across the street, in a small cafe that catered to the building staff, a young waitress named Eliza Morgan balanced a tray of coffee cups. She had been working since dawn, helping her mother pay off medical bills and covering her younger brother's school fees. She was known for noticing details customers missed. She could remember orders without writing them down, spot a fake smile from across the room, and sense tension. Like a shift in air pressure that morning, one of the junior clerks from Adrian's company rushed in, asking for a last-minute coffee delivery to the executive floor. Eliza volunteered to take it herself, partly for the extra tip and partly because something in the clerk's voice sounded strained when she entered the sleek office lobby. She felt the unusual silence, no assistants chatting, no phones ringing, just a heavy stillness. She followed the directions to the conference room, the door slightly open. Inside, she saw Adrian seated at the head of the table, pen poised above paper, his expression not angry, not dramatic, just quietly broken. She set the tray down carefully, trying not to disturb the gravity of the moment, but as she glanced at the stack of documents, a habit she had developed from years of checking receipts and bills, her eyes caught a figure that seemed out of place, a percentage calculation that did not align with the line above it. She blinked, thinking she must be mistaken. She was not a financial expert, just a waitress, yet numbers had always made sense to her. She had managed household budgets down to the last coin. She hesitated, her heart pounding. Who was she to interrupt a room full of executives and lawyers? But something about the way the decimal point shifted the entire outcome nagged at her mind. Adrian's pen touched the paper, the faint scratch echoing in the silence, and in that instant, Eliza heard her own voice cutting through the tension. Sir, I think there might be an error. She felt every eye in the room turned toward her, some irritated, some surprised. Adrian paused, slowly lifting his gaze to meet hers. He almost dismissed her the way powerful men sometimes dismiss small interruptions, yet there was sincerity in her expression, not arrogance, not attention-seeking, just urgency. She stepped closer, pointing gently at the line in question, explaining that if the percentage adjustment was calculated based on the previous quarter, rather than the projected loss, the total deficit would shrink significantly. The room stiffened. One of the lawyers frowned, quickly scanning the numbers again. Adrian's advisor leaned forward, recalculating on his tablet. Seconds stretched endlessly. Then the advisor's eyes widened. He looked at the lawyer, then back at Adrian, and whispered that the waitress was right. A misapplied formula had inflated the projected losses. The bankruptcy filing was based on incorrect data. A silence heavier than before settled in, but this time it was charged with disbelief. Adrian felt his pulse surge. The fog that had clouded his thoughts began to clear. He demanded a full review of the financial model immediately. The team scrambled, calling analysts, rechecking spreadsheets, uncovering that a junior accountant had mistakenly duplicated a loss column from a subsidiary that had already been accounted for. The error compounded across reports, creating the illusion of collapse when in reality, the company still had viable restructuring options. Adrian's hand trembled, not from defeat now, but from realization he had been seconds away from surrendering an empire due to a simple oversight. He stood up slowly, looking at Eliza, as if seeing a lifeline in human form. The same room that had prepared to witness his downfall now buzzed with urgent recalculations, strategies, revived negotiations, reopened hope flooding back into walls that moments earlier felt like a tomb. Eliza stepped back, unsure whether she had overstepped, but Adrian walked toward, her gratitude visible in his eyes. He asked her name and she answered softly. The executives, who had once overlooked every staff member, now regarded her with astonishment. The story of how a waitress saved a billion-dollar company began spreading through the building like wildfire. Yet for Eliza, it was never about glory. It was about noticing what others missed, about trusting that even the smallest voice could matter. And as Adrian returned to the head of the table, no longer defeated but determined, he realized that power does not always sit in the most expensive chair. Sometimes it stands quietly by the door, holding a tray of coffee and the courage to speak at the right moment. The news of the halted signature spread through the executive floor faster than any market rumor. Analysts, who had already begun drafting public statements, were suddenly instructed to pause every external communication, and within minutes the conference room transformed from a chamber of surrender into a war room of strategy. Adrian Cole stood at the head of the table, no longer a man awaiting collapse, but a leader awakened by the thin line between ruin and recovery. He ordered a complete forensic review of every financial projection from the past 12 months. Teams of accountants reopened files that had been sealed with quiet despair, discovering layers of assumptions built upon that single duplicated loss column. The mistake had multiplied fear inside the company, just as it had multiplied numbers on the page. And as corrections unfolded, a different reality emerged. One where the company was wounded but not dying, strained but not bankrupt, viable enough to restructure rather than dissolve. Adrian felt a surge of responsibility wash over him, realizing how close he had come to abandoning thousands of employees who depended on his decisions. He thought of factory workers, engineers, receptionists, drivers, and interns whose livelihoods hung on the accuracy of spreadsheets, and he understood that leadership was not about pride or image, but about patience and verification. He asked for Eliza Morgan to remain in the building while the review continued, not as a servant bringing coffee, but as an observer whose perspective had shifted the outcome. She waited quietly in a side office, unsure of what role she now played in a world of tailored suits and polished shoes, yet calm in the knowledge that she had simply spoken truth. Hours passed, and with each recalculation, the projected deficit shrank. Negotiations that had been considered impossible reopened as lenders, informed of the corrected data, expressed renewed willingness to restructure debt rather than force liquidation. Adrian's legal team revised documents, replacing bankruptcy language with strategic protection clauses, buying time instead of declaring defeat. The emotional temperature of the office changed from mourning to cautious determination. Employees who had sensed something wrong that morning began noticing subtle signs of life in hurried footsteps and focused whispers. By late afternoon, Adrian requested Eliza join him again in the conference room. This time the atmosphere carried respect rather than dismissal. He publicly acknowledged that her attention to detail had prevented irreversible damage, and he offered her an opportunity, not as charity, but as recognition, inviting her to join the company in a financial oversight training program, sponsored entirely by him, explaining that talent is not defined by job titles, but by awareness and courage. Eliza listened, stunned yet composed. She spoke honestly, saying she never studied finance formally but learned numbers from necessity, from managing bills, counting tips, stretching groceries across weeks. Adrian smiled, understanding that real education often grows from survival. He instructed his human resources director to create a scholarship in her name aimed at supporting employees or community members who demonstrated exceptional observational skills regardless of background. The gesture sent a powerful message throughout the organization that hierarchy does not hold a monopoly on wisdom. Meanwhile, Adrian's executives implemented new multi-layer verification systems, ensuring no single formula could again distort reality. Internal culture began shifting as managers encouraged junior staff to question assumptions rather than fear speaking up. The company that nearly collapsed under the weight of one unchecked error was rebuilding itself on transparency and collective vigilance within weeks. Public confidence stabilized, markets responded positively to the revised strategy, and media outlets that had prepared obituaries for Adrian's empire now published stories of resilience and unexpected heroism, yet beyond headlines. The deeper transformation occurred within Adrian himself. He adopted a new ritual before signing any major document, pausing deliberately to invite dissenting opinions, remembering the morning when silence almost cost everything. He visited the cafe across the street, personally thanking Eliza's mother for raising a daughter brave enough to interrupt power, and he ensured the medical bills burdening their family were cleared anonymously, refusing publicity for the act. Months later, during a company-wide address, Adrian recounted the day, not to dramatize his near fall but to emphasize the lesson that vigilance can arrive from the most unanticipated places. He reminded his employees that success breeds speed, but wisdom requires slowing down and listening. The auditorium filled with applause, not for wealth regained, but for humility learned. Eliza began her training, balancing work and study, gradually discovering a passion for financial analysis she once thought beyond her reach. Mentors within the company guided her, recognizing that her instinct for anomalies was rare and invaluable. Over time, she contributed to internal audit teams catching minor discrepancies before they grew dangerous, earning respect through competence rather than novelty. Adrian often reflected on how different his life would have been had she remained silent, how pride and exhaustion had nearly sealed his fate. He realized that sometimes the brink of destruction is not loud or dramatic, but quiet and procedural, disguised as routine. Paperwork awaiting a signature, and he understood that destiny can pivot on a single brave sentence spoken by someone's society overlooks. The company eventually expanded again, stronger and more ethically grounded than before, embedding departmental review panels and open communication channels as permanent safeguards. Investors praised the structural reforms, unaware that their origin traced back to a waitress with steady eyes. The story became part of corporate folklore, retold to new hires as proof that every role carries potential impact and that awareness is a form of leadership. Adrian kept the original, unsigned bankruptcy page framed in his private office, not as a symbol of failure, but as a reminder that downfall can be prevented when even one person refuses to ignore doubt. And on quiet mornings when sunlight filtered through the glass walls, he would glance at that page, remembering the weight of the pen, the silence of the room, and the voice that changed everything, because in the end, it was never just about saving a fortune. It was about recognizing that the smallest action performed with courage can redirect the course of countless lives. And that truth, once spoken at the right moment, has the power to rebuild what fear almost destroyed.